All right, that might bring us right to the next question then, because it's another personal one. Landon asks, what aspects of evolutionary theory do you personally consider to be just so stories or assertions that have unverifiable and speculative?
All of them.
Nice.
I mean, what can I say? None of them have any value whatsoever. It'd be nice if he'd mentioned, say, a particular one that he thought or whatever, but regardless, it doesn't matter whether you believe in punctuated equilibrium or whatever. None of them are valid. All of them are easily disproven using science to do it. And again, I mentioned the methodology of indirect proof, not the methodology of direct proof.
What do you think about the assumed chromosome 2 fusion? Is this evidence that man is related to apes?
But again, that has been disproven decades ago. That is so old, I'm surprised that anybody would even mention it. But the fact of the matter is that we are not genetically related to apes at all. Now, think about it for just a second. Let's run some numbers. Evolutionists would like you to think that as things got bigger, better, faster, smarter, we were adding DNA, uh, accumulating it to get to the bigger, better, faster, smarter, correct? The more complex, more intelligent. Is that right? And yet, there are creatures that have far more genetic information. Apes have 11.5% more DNA than we do, but they certainly are not better than us. And the idea that is so commonly thrown around, oh, I heard it on TV yesterday. This newsman who didn't have a clue what he was talking about said, well, we're only 1 or 2% DNA different from apes. First of all, it was never true. Never true. It's a lie, flat out lie. It was invented about 1998, 1999 with no evidence to support it whatsoever. However, what happened? As we started to understand the human genetic genome, we started to find out that it has vastly different characteristics to that of apes. So around the year 2000, instead of being 96, 97, 98, 99% the same as, say, chimpanzees, even the evolutionists, without any evidence beyond the fact that they could start telling that there were differences, only published it was 95.2. But what happened was, as they went on to 2005 and on to 2013, and I want to bring you up to date, the more we knew about the genetics of the human, and we knew the entire genome alphabet in 2003, but we didn't know the ape genome, every character, in 2003. So they were comparing incomplete information with complete information. And they were using the human DNA as a template to put the ape DNA in the order they wanted it to make it look like it came from us. But of course, that's not true. The DNA actually is on different chromosomes and so forth. And the concept apes have an extra set of chromosomes we don't have, and that somehow or another they melded together in the X chromosome. Well, what happens? The more we know, the more the numbers changed. So if you take a look at the publications, for instance, of the national proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, you find out that the numbers were going down as a percentage. And today, we can say the DNA of humans and apes is only 70% the same. Now, let's compare that for just a moment. That's 900 million DNA differences to start with. And even at rates which evolutionists believe material changes beneficially, there wouldn't be enough time to produce a human. And that's using their assumptions. But let's take a look. You don't start at zero when you compare living organisms when it comes to DNA. All living organisms, I don't care whether you're a bacteria, a plant, an animal, or a human being, all organisms that are biological share 25% the same DNA. So you don't start at zero to compare to begin with. I love the fact that you mentioned SpongeBob a little earlier because I just wanted to break out laughing. And I'll explain why. Let's take a look and compare now the genomes that we do know compared to humans and apes. And I mentioned we now know that we're only 70% the same genetically in the genes with apes, right? But you're 50 to 60% the same as a banana. You're 35% the same as a daffodil or narcissus. It's the same plant. But you are 86% the same as a rat. At least a rat's a mammal, is that correct? But you are 70% the same as a sea sponge. So maybe SpongeBob and we are related.
Yeah, we're also 80% related to cows, 95% to dogs. It's just crazy. The numbers are
You
all over.
see, you cannot compare living organisms by looking at the content of the DNA. It's an invalid comparison. And the numbers you and I were just throwing out, I mean, there's lots of others too. I mean, we're 86% the same as a sea sponge. We're 70% the same as a sea squirt. So all this comparison means absolutely nothing. It's what's the information contained in it that's important.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
the information is not in the molecule, the information is on the molecule. The same way that written characters are on a piece of paper, the molecule is just the paper, the message is written on the paper. In the same way, the information to recreate a human body or a sea sponge, a bacteria, is the information that's written on the molecule. It's not in the molecule.
Right. Man, these are you're answering everything great. This is awesome. Here's one
I
from
specialize in this, you know.
that's good. Yeah, I bet you haven't not heard a question, so this will be good. Emotionally stunted emoji con said, if traits come about from via loss of information, how can a camel get a hump and a polar bear with blubber or subcutaneous layers of fat under the skin? I don't know what blubber. I think he meant.
Well, I mean, I got the basics of it.
Yeah.
But I actually addressed that earlier when I talked about how the environment does not select, but the environment does eliminate. And if polar bears didn't have white fur, if they didn't have small ear flaps, if they didn't have extra subcutaneous fat, they could not survive. And only the bears that had it survived, and those that didn't were eliminated. And I would point out the same thing. Now, I adamantly will tell you there is no such thing as different human races. There's only one human race. You're either human or you're not. What we do have are ethnic appearances. Now, why do we call people in the Orient sometimes yellow-skinned? Well, first of all, it's a false concept, but nonetheless, you know, there's the black skin, the white skin, red skin, and some people say yellow skin, correct? But their skin isn't yellow. What they have is a very low level of melanin for pigment, just as I am melanin deficient. I want to be politically correct. And so I'm relatively fair skinned. I'm Scandinavian Scottish by background. And they tend to be very white, blue eyed, blonde haired. When I had hair, it was blonde, and I had blue eyes, etc. Now, why do we call the people of the Orient sometimes yellow skinned? It's because they have a genetic propensity for a subcutaneous layer of fat under the epidermis, and because the sunlight bounces off their skin. Remember, the color you see is the color that's bouncing off and not absorbed. And because human fat looks very much like chicken fat, you know, everybody's seen raw chicken fat. It's a yellowy cast, light yellow, and that's the way our fat looks. And so when the light bounces back off of their skin, our eye perceives it as a slightly yellowish cast because of the light reflecting off the fat, not the pigment. Polar bears are some of the same way, genetic propensity where they have extra subcutaneous fat that allows them to swim in seawater that's at about 34 degrees to down to maybe even 28 below freezing and not die.
Have you looked into or familiar with the Earth expansion theory?
Yeah. First of all, I just wrote a long article you can read on my website at creationworldview.org about there is no such thing as a flat Earth, which has been going around a lot too. But the Earth expansion theory is equally invalid. Now, has surface of the Earth changed locations? Yes, definitely so. And there used to be a lot more water below the surface and that came up at the time of the flood and is now on the surface, but it simply traded locations. It didn't expand the Earth. The Earth is the same weight, the same size, basically. I mean, infinitesimal differences. People don't realize, but they think of mountains like Mount Everest, and they think about the Matterhorn and the Rockies, and I was just in the Rockies of Canada and so on. And they tend to think of these great altitudes, something being 6 miles high. But if you looked at the Earth, it's smoother than a billiard ball. A billiard ball actually has more texture than the Earth's surface. And all that has happened is water came up and land went down, but it hasn't changed significantly the size of the Earth. It hasn't changed the mass of the Earth or the weight of the Earth, etc. The Earth does get slightly heavier over time simply because of added meteorite or water from comets being accumulated, but it's infinitesimal.
Got it. What are your future plans? Do you have any debates or interviews coming up?
Well, I'm a full-time Christian missionary teacher. And so next Thursday, I leave for my 15th annual teaching trip in Brazil. In November, I will leave for my 55th mission trip to Russia. I also work in other countries around the world. I've recently been in Kazakhstan, and I've been in England, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, Netherlands, and Spain, and on and on, South Africa. I actually have worked on 5 continents. I'd go to Antarctica if you can get me an invitation.
Wow. Yeah.
But most of my work is domestic. So when I get back from Brazil, I'm going to take a little vacation with the family, and then immediately starting after the holiday in September, I will start traveling domestically. I'm going to be going up north, Pennsylvania, for instance. My schedule's on the website. So you can always do that, or on the back of our newsletter, which we send out. But nonetheless, I will be traveling domestically, but occasionally I'll lead tours to Israel teaching. I've written a book on the Feast of the Old Testament to straighten out a lot of things for people. And actually, I studied the feasts as a proof for creation as well. A quick little example is that the day of the Jewish calendar that the ark came to rest is exactly the same day of the calendar that Christ rose from the dead.